Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
In our Farm Basics segment each week, we talk about something that we may commonly do or use on the farm and try to relate that to you if you are a non-farmer. Well, today our topic is harvest loss.
All right, as farmers are combining or harvesting their field, they obviously want to get all that grain in the grain tank of the combine and ultimately in a truck because they're going to sell it, and that's how they make their money. So they don't want to have grain just scatter and fall on the ground where they can't pick it up, but unfortunately, when you run a machine through the field, there's going to be some degree of loss in most cases.
Well, we really talk about three types of, we'll call it harvest loss. One is before we actually even harvest. If it falls on the ground prior to us getting there, or quite frankly, if it's eaten by an animal, that's not a good thing. If we knock it off with the combine when we're going through and it falls on the ground rather than going in the machine, that's bad. And then we also have the case where when we are processing that grain inside the combine, if we don't capture all the grain and some of it ends up out of the back end of the combine, that's another type of harvest loss. So there are all kinds of things that we as farmers need to take a look at to minimize that type of loss.
And it's easy to see the economic loss. Grain's on the ground. Farmers can quickly analyze, well, how much grain is on the ground using different systems. Just a square on the ground, they can count kernels in the square, or they could use a bushel plus system where it's a little more scientific and farmers can see exactly where it's coming out of the combine. But either way, you've got loss and you lost money, but you haven't finished your losing yet. Now you've lost because that crop seed is going to grow, and now you got to stop it in the next crop.
Well, it may grow, and yes, it could be what we would call a volunteer crop where it just grows on its own. It now, in effect, becomes a weed. So like on our farm, for example, if we have loss with corn in the fall, well, now we have volunteer corn that grows the next year for planting soybeans, and now we have to spend money on a herbicide to go kill it. So it's a vicious cycle. We don't want any harvest loss. We want the maximum amount of profit on our farm. And when we do that, we actually minimize our herbicide expense the following year. And besides that, when there is loss on the ground and those seeds, they can actually maybe carry some disease and it causes more problems out in your field.
Well, there's just a lot of reasons why farmers don't want to lose grain at harvest. It costs them probably a couple of times at least on the farm. So you'll see farmers taking their time as they're doing their harvest, making sure the machines are set up correctly to avoid the problem.
Hey, by the way, one of the biggest things that farmers can do to minimize that loss is getting out there and harvesting earlier. When they harvest wetter grain, it costs more to dry the grain down, but then they have a lot less harvest loss in a lot of cases. So it's always this balancing act, trying to weigh that out. Am I there too early and it's going to cost me a bunch of money to dry it down, but I have minimal loss? Or the other end of the spectrum is I got a lot of loss, but not a lot of drying cost.
Timing is absolutely critical at harvest. Timing is also critical when it comes to weed control. We'll talk about how that impacts your control of our weed of the week coming up later in the show.